This is Clarence Moye with the Words Daily, speaking with Maz Makhani, the DP of Netflix's, and Antoine Fuqua's The Guilty, which is currently streaming. How are you, Maz?
I'm well. Thank you, Clarence. How
Excellent.
are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to see that you stayed busy during the pandemic.
Yeah, surprisingly, it there was things going on. There were,
Yeah,
it was a little scary and a little sensitive, but there was some music videos, commercials, and then the film that
right.
happened.
Well, I know you've worked with Antoine before. So what was going through your head when he contacted you and said, "I want to make this movie in the pandemic. It's going to be basically sequestered in a room. We're gonna have to obey all those protocols." What were some of the initial challenges you thought of while you were processing that request?
I really didn't. For me, there's no limitations. The only thing
Mhm.
that was, and the way the way Antoine approached me, we really didn't even consider, that would be any sort of a massive obstacle. It became, not an obstacle, but there's a lot of protocols, and there was a lot of testing, and there was social distancing, which makes it difficult because of the all the communication that has to happen on set, all
Mhm.
the closeness and the talking, and sometimes even whispering when Jake is about to get into character, and so that made it. And then of course, and this was when the rules last year were you have to not only wear goggles, you have to have closed goggles plus the mask
Mhm.
and also the face shield. I mean, it was
Right.
just and it was making it very difficult to see for everybody on set. So everybody had to sort of take their time, move a little bit slower, stand a little further back, and that probably slowed us down a little bit. But we got through it. Luckily, nobody got COVID on set,
Right.
and we were
11
able to
days. It
make the
didn't slow
film.
you down too much.
No, it should have been faster. You
Really?
know? Yeah,
That's
well, all the
crazy.
thing we did a lot of, we did our homework.
Mhm.
I did my homework. I think Antoine did his, Jake did his, everybody, the production designer. We all sort of, the way that, one of the things that helped speed things along was obviously Jake being him,
Right.
as good as he is, and not needing a gazillion takes, and knowing the material as well as
Mhm.
he did. The second was, I think, maybe not the second, but another thing that really sort of led to the speed was three cameras. Three cameras that were always rolling. We were able to get coverage from every conceivable angle without sacrificing the look of one camera. And the reason that is I sort of thought about how I wanted to light this space and how I wanted to light the film. And I felt from the beginning that it needed to feel real and sort of ambient
Mhm.
driven, where the ambience of the room did most of the lighting, the monitors across from him with the orange fire, and the desk lamp, and the sort of this space did most of the work. And by doing that, I didn't have to sit there and worry about which light was the most appropriate for which lens. It just sort of, we were able to be everywhere at the same time. And of course, when we came in for close-ups and coverage, I was able to shape light, bring negative fill, and sort of create some contrast when I could. But for the most part, it was really nice to sort of feel free to put the cameras where I needed and not worry about one of the cameras sacrificing the quality of light, because I don't think that.
Right.
And even if it was flat, it was okay because it just felt more real, which is what the film is. It needed to feel as real as possible.
Absolutely. So I know, the bulk of the film or the initial sequence of the film takes place in the main room, and then he segues into an sort of an adjoining conference room or another facility to take the call, to extend the call where he can speak privately. Um, did the lighting cues change? Did the lighting evolve through the film?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It starts off, the movie starts off, the sun is setting. So this is
Mhm.
beautiful, sort of warm, low sunlight pushing across the entire communication center. And then that sort of gradually turns into a night interior. And then from there, when he goes into the smaller office, I feel like there's a few things that Antoine and I were very deliberate on. One was the, the, it getting darker. The small room sort of starts off a little dark because really it's a side room, and
Right.
it's not as bright as the big room, but it starts off somewhat bright considering. And then a few things happened. He draws the blinds. The blinds are black, and then there's a lot of ambient, less ambient coming in. It's darker, and then from there, at some point, the desk lamp gets kicked off, or he gets angry, and the desk lamp flies off the table, and then now there's just really him in a room where where does that light come from? And part of the story, which was really great, is that in a communication center, when the dispatchers take a call, there's a red light that turns on above the desk, which
Right.
signifies that it's live. And so that red light got brighter and brighter, and as it did, the ambience of the room, I sort of brought it down lower and lower, so that that red light becomes more prominent in a sort of purgatory, in the confession, and sort of the end of the film, where he really unleashes and emotionally lets go. And so then the red light becomes more and more prominent. And yes, it was that part of it was a little challenging, because we had to actually go back to that scene twice. We shot it when we first started shooting the film, and we shot it again at the end,
Mhm.
and they sort of intercut a little bit of both, a little bit of both, the beginning and the end. And
Right.
so that was, obviously there was some things that needed to be fine tuned in telecine, and sort of recalibrated, so that everything felt like it was consistent. Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that the challenge not only became the light was changing and shifting and getting darker and going into these different directions, but also the camera was getting closer and
Mhm.
wider. So, I was started off a little bit on longer lenses, and then it slowly got into more intimate, into Jake's sort of smaller space, smaller area, with
Right.
wider lenses to create a little bit more tension.
Yeah, so I actually want to talk about that, because as I think about the film and as I watched the film, I thought it's deceptively simple because it's set in a single room, but you have to figure out ways of amping up the tension, because it is a very intense film and it keeps that tension going, and it's not just the action, the dialogue, it's also the artifacts of cinema, the things like cinematography, things like the sound. Talk to me a little bit more about how you did amp up the tension through the camera work.
Well, before I talk about camera work, I will say that the editor just
Mhm.
completely killed this film, just in terms of being able to take all of these various camera positions, and and add attention to the various angles. But it was just in terms of camera, I think this was a situation where I've never really gotten that close to an actor on a macro lens in a narrative piece. So the macro lens, the very extreme close-ups of his mouth and his eyes, and sort of over his ear, with the headset and foreground, and everything else falling off, and then wrecking focus to his lips, and all that stuff, I think really did create tension in those moments where he was hearing something important or saying something important. But also, there's something about a frontal camera versus a profile camera, right? And so, in the moments where it's important to see his face and sort of feel what he's feeling from a perspective of Jake, the frontal camera, I think, was used. And it's interesting, because at one point in the film, it does hold on a pure profile shot of him. That's kind of a long lens that we were able to shoot through some. Peter Wenham built these beautiful sets, but he had these sort of pointy walls with glass partitions above them, sort of milked glass, imperfected glass partitions. And so to shoot sort of through that on the profile, a little piece of that in the foreground, and then also really seeing Jake from that perspective of not frontal, it sort of disconnects you from him for a moment, and allows you to see him from a sort of a more of a vulnerable perspective. And these things did help. I mean, we definitely covered him pretty well at both desks, both in the big room and the small room, just in terms of coverage. And we had, luckily I had three cameras, so we were able to do 20 minutes at a time with three cameras, and then potentially, get three more angles relatively quickly, or not. I mean, there was scenes in the film where we really just had three cameras going. Two were crossing, one was sort of frontal, and that's all we did,
Mhm.
because Jake, sort of performed so well throughout the entire scene. We didn't have to get too much coverage. And then, of course, we went in and got coverage of everything else, the monitors, and the, telephone, and a sort of wider of the space of the big room and the small room. So yeah, the having three cameras and having three incredible operators and having three different style lenses really sort of helped with being able to cover it very quickly. and methodically.
So you mentioned Jake is a consummate professional in this. He helped bang that out in a very small number of days. Talk to me about your working relationship with him, in terms of making sure that you captured those moments of intensity. I mean, this is an intense performance. I keep using that word intense. It's just an intense film. But capturing that performance, how do you work with the actor in that case?
There was nothing to say. He did him.
Yeah.
He did Jake, and I think he's a veteran. He's very,
Mhm.
very aware of what lenses are where they are and how he's gonna perform for these lenses. So I think as soon as he saw a lens come in, 8 inches away from his face, he sort of knew, how quickly he can come out of that frame. So he
Right.
would, I think he really just sort of worked the cameras because he's such a professional. He knows his craft. I think the unsung heroes in this film are my focus pullers, to be honest with you, because I shot
Mhm.
the entire film wide open on these lenses, which is a very shallow depth of field, and these guys had to pull focus, from various parts of Jake's face,
Wow.
and so between sort of the choreography between Jake's performance and staying in the frame, and then the focus pullers being where they were, and the light cues happening when he picked up and turned, and hung up the phone. There was a lot of sort of, and then that's just on my end. And there's a whole other set of puzzles that the sound department had to figure out,
Right.
which I
Yeah.
think did an incredible job with sound as well.
Yeah. I'm actually speaking with them tomorrow. In fact, um, what do you think, aside from the protocols that were necessary because of the pandemic, what do you think the most challenging thing for you to capture was in the film?
Well, it was difficult sometimes because obviously everybody's wearing a mask, right? And Jake was
Mhm.
wearing, the gear, and I would have to try to light his face without seeing his face.
Right.
So I'm looking at a big bright white mask, and you've got the shield and all this stuff. So some of the time it was a little bit challenging, sort of deciding whether or not I could see his eye. I wanted to get a little twinkle in his eyeball. I wanted to actually see a little bit of some life in his eyes when it was real super dark. And that was sometimes challenging because I had to sort of guesstimate
Mhm.
what that would look like versus having stand in, or the talent there for a moment so that I could make everything perfect in terms of brightness and reflections and what I don't want to see. And I didn't have, so that made it a little bit challenging. I had to sort of imagine what he would look like. And then of course, like when the camera started rolling, quickly the mask came off, and then I was like, okay, cool. Or not. In which case I had to wait till the
Adjust
next
on the
take to
fly.
do, yeah, though there was no adjusting on the fly. I had to
Okay.
wait till the next day. These are 20-minute long takes. So
No, right.
I had to own it if it wasn't perfect. But everything seemed, it worked out. It
Plus, you've
worked out.
got Antoine in a van because you and your crew are in the room with them, right? But
Correct.
Antoine is the van. Talk to me about working with him, basically through walkie-talkie.
We Antoine and I have a shorthand. I mean, we
Okay.
we both love the same stuff. Rarely do I really love a composition or something that's lit a certain way and have him say that sucks. Usually, and I love what he loves, and he seems to like, the stuff that we're doing together. So we have that, which was very, very helpful. The other thing is that we did do a walkthrough before Antoine had to quarantine. We actually had a good solid day with Jake, me, Antoine, and Jake, and our first AD on the floor. There was nobody else there. And, while Jake was, sort of running his dialogue, Antoine and I would sort of walk around the room, and Antoine just looks at me, and I pretty much know he goes like this with this, and I know what frame size he's talking about. I know what he wants to do. And then on the day, if he felt that, in that moment, the dialogue he wants to bring more tension, and he wants to sort of, add a little bit of something, a move to the dialogue, he would text me, or we would
Mhm.
have a conversation about it. But for the most part, that part was pretty easy. The communication with Antoine was not difficult. If I had a question, I would text him, or in the mornings on my way to set, we had a conversation about the best things of the day before, the stuff he's happy with, the stuff what we should do more of, less of, and just sort of shaped it that way. But we were in communication through mostly just our cell phones, and a few times via walkie. But I didn't
Right.
really carry a walkie around, so
Right.
it's mostly just yeah.
Excellent. Well, Maz, I think those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for the time. Great work on the film, and I look forward to what you're working on next.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet
Thanks,
you
man.
too. Take care.
Thank you.